first thing, before I even dive into this, do not worry if today you have not yet gotten materials, for a number of reasons. One, the bookstore seems to be having their problems over there. A couple of you have emailed me about going over there and them having some of the stuff and not other things. Yep, that seems to be the way right now. I don't know. It seems like it was a screw up, a mix up when it came to the passing of power from the last manager who was resigning to the new one. Seems like some lines got crossed and they thought the things had been ordered by the previous manager when there were some things that she had not ordered. Most of what you need they have, but they are missing some stuff. On top of that, we didn't get to meet on Thursday because I was incredibly sick. It lasted into Friday as well, for that matter. So we didn't get to have our conversation about the materials here in the classroom. Now, what I did was post a video that's an old video from a previous class. That's on Google Classroom. Go there because that video not only talks about the materials and shows you images of the materials and talks about places to go to get the materials if the bookstore is out of your price point, and what materials might be listed that I don't necessarily want you to bother with purchasing because it's something that we'll use sparingly during the semester, and I'd hate for you to go spend money on that, so I'll provide it for you here. Things like there are certain kinds of paper that we'll draw on that I don't want you to spend money on. The ink, I don't want you to spend money on. Things like that are mentioned in there. But also that video goes over the sketchbook expectations. Like what I'm expecting you to do in that sketchbook. Go and watch that when you got a chance. Now, it was a video that was taken over the period of a class, right? So it's a little long. So it's perfectly fine by me if you want to watch it at a sped up rate. If you want to turn it to like 1.5, 2 times speed, whatever. It's perfectly fine by me. But I want you to watch it because if you have any questions after seeing it, I want you to ask those. That's what we would have done if we were in class that day. I would have given you that opportunity to ask questions about what I was talking about. And it bugs me that we didn't get that opportunity. So with those 2 things in place, 3 things, I guess, I understand if anybody does not have materials. Or if you maybe went out and decided to try to go grab them on your own and someone convinced you to buy the wrong stuff. I get that too. So no worries. No worries. Today and for the next few weeks, I'll always have a stash sitting out here on the table. What's out there right now is a pad of newsprint, some pencils, some erasers. Right? If I need to get more, I will. I put out a certain number of them, expecting that there'd be some people who might have materials. But if nobody has them, I'll put a few more out to make sure that everybody's got something. All right? Now, the second thing I was going to mention is what you see happening up here. From here on out, this projection will be on the screen each day as you come in. I was running a little late in getting in here and getting set up this morning. But for the most part, I'll usually be in here a good 20 minutes before class with this on the screen, telling you what you should do to get ready for the day. As soon as you walk into the classroom, look up there, check on what you need to do, and get set up. If you come in early, now I'm not suggesting anyone has to come in early, but if you do come in early, that means you can kind of pick out your primo spot. You can be where you would like to be out here. Showing up a bit later, you may have to just sort of pick and choose from what's left over as far as the spots go out here. So it'll say things like what this says right now, where it says to gather up your materials and choose a spot around the still life. I have this sort of blinking thing about the drawing board because I won't necessarily write that down on every one of these, but you need one. The drawing boards are over there on top of the cabinet. There's a little sign even that says drawing boards, and it's pointing down to them. You'll need one of those every day in class. All right. It mentions the yardsticks. They're over there by the door, hanging on the wall. You can see these long metal yardsticks. The rulers are in a drawer that I meant to pop open, but in the cabinet here below where the drawing boards are, there's a drawer off down that direction labeled rulers. And then down here in the materials, it says you need the 18 by 24 newsprint. That's here. 1 or 2 sheets, it says, should do for today. If you just want to grab 1, that's perfectly fine, because you will probably only get... Nah, go ahead and grab 2, just be on the safe side, just in case. Although I really think you probably only have time for 1 drawing today. A 2B or a 4B graphite pencil. You only really need 1 today. I put some 4Bs out on the table. Hard and kneaded erasers. I just worried about putting some hard erasers out there. Ruler and yardstick. You now know where to find those. And here I did write drawing board, though I won't mention that from here on out. It'll just be sort of understood that you need to make sure that you grab a drawing board. So I'm going to pause for a moment and let you grab all that stuff and pick out one of these spots that's around the still life to place your stuff on. Now, you may remember that these drawing courses were in a seated position on Tuesday of last week. I've stood them out because your first drawing that you do, I want you to do from a standing position. So go ahead, grab your drawing board. You can grab a sheet of paper out of there, grab a pencil, grab an eraser, grab a yardstick, a ruler, pick yourself a spot around the still life. And then we'll move on from there. Okay. I should have already had this open. Come on, slow computer. All right. What am I looking for? This is what I'm looking for. All right, so, nope, let me just open the ones that are 1 point. I don't want to accidentally open up something I don't need. All right. So, that's not what I meant to do. I want to go full screen. They've changed where everything is. There it is. All right. We are going to start off the semester learning about a technique. And don't worry about having to write this down right now, because I'll write it up there on the board in a second when I go over there to do the demonstration, called linear perspective. A linear perspective is a means of creating certain rules on the page that if we, as the person drafting that drawing, follow those rules, it will create a believable sense of three-dimensional space. We'll start off with what is referred to as one-point perspective, which will give us drawings kind of like, well, not kind of like, exactly like what you're seeing here, where we need objects to be fairly planar when you're first learning this. Planar meaning they've got flat sides to them. We'll define those terms a little bit better in a moment. And that one of those sides, one of those planes, should be directly facing you and squared off with your shoulders. If anything doesn't look like that, you can't quite make one-point perspective work. So you'll notice how all of these little boxes that people are drawing are all at right angles from each other, or they're parallel. And what you always have is one side or plane that is directly facing you, the viewer, and is squared off with our shoulders. And then the other planes that we see, the sides, the top, are all receding backward in space toward, you might notice where this person hasn't quite erased it that well, one vanishing point, as we're going to call it. If you notice, all these lines are headed back that way. So let me talk about how this is done then. If you don't have a sketchbook, I'd get something out that you can take some notes in and then transfer that to your sketchbook later. If you have your sketchbook, get it out and take some notes. What we're going to dive into, starting this week and continuing through the next few weeks, is a technique known as linear perspective. Linear perspective. Linear perspective, it has that root word line, because it is a way of using lines on a page that conform to very specific rules that give us the sense that, again, like I mentioned earlier, this is not a flat two-dimensional sheet of paper, but it is something that has depth that we could step into. It was developed during the Italian Renaissance. So we're talking like the late 1400s, by artists who were very interested and very obsessed with trying to make these large paintings on walls in churches and cathedrals that they wanted the audience standing in front of it to feel like they could literally just step right in. And so this guy, Brunelleschi, don't worry about writing his name down, that's not important. He was an architect, and he developed linear perspective. And once people started seeing what he was doing, it caught on, and people went crazy with it. To the point there are even some paintings where it's a bit silly, the way that it's used. But linear perspective, first I'll mention this. And the one that we'll be working on this week and next week is called one-point perspective. For reasons that we'll get to momentarily. All right, so how linear perspective works is it takes what Brunelleschi came up with in order to make this work was he says we have to imagine a one-eyed observer. So let's imagine Mike Wachowski, right, with his one eye. He has like two horns, right? He has some hands, but I don't feel like drawing them. So a one-eyed observer, right, who's looking at the world, but he also has his head completely locked in place. Brunelleschi says that's the only way we can make this work. Now, why? Well, because our two eyes, if you've never noticed this yourself, close one and then open it and then close the other, and you'll see that the world shifts ever so slightly between our two eyes. That would be a little difficult to try to draw, right? Those two versions of the world that you see. In fact, if I hold something up in front of me like this pencil, right? Because I have two eyes, if I focus on the pencil, the table beyond it and all of you, I see two of. You split in half, right? Or not in half, you split into two. And then if I look out there at you guys, I suddenly have two pencils in front of me because my eyes have to do that kind of thing. I close one eye and make myself into Mike Wachowski here, and I hold this up. I have one pencil, and there's one of each of you out there. So that's the reason for the one-eyed observer. Why should his head be locked in place? Well, if I want to draw what's here in front of me, and I want to make sure that everything is accurate to the way that I'm seeing it, if I look up here and then try to draw what I'm seeing, and then turn my head over here and look and try to draw what I'm seeing, the world changes a bit because I turned my head. The world shifted around me. The perspective is different depending on where I'm looking. But if I have my head locked in place, looking outward at what I'm looking at, everything stays the same. I mean, all I have to do even is just kind of shift my weight left to right just ever so slightly, and the world kind of shifts in front of my eyes. So Brunelleschi says if we take this theoretical one-eyed observer who has his head locked in place, I don't know, let's say he's got a vice grip on his head, right? Big vice grip that's holding his head in place so he can't look anywhere but straight forward. A couple of things can end up happening for us. So there are some rules that have to be on the page for linear perspective to work. And this is important stuff that I would put down and commit to paper if I were in your shoes. These are some lines and marks that we put on the page that are imaginary, that are there to help us, and oftentimes these things can be erased. First thing you need, I need a darker pencil than that, is a horizontal line that goes all the way across the width of your page. This horizontal line is referred to as the horizon. Simple enough, easy to remember. And it represents two things on the page. These are both important to understand. It represents the literal horizon that would be out there somewhere if there was nothing blocking my way and I could see it. Right? It's out there somewhere. Sure, there's a wall in my way right now. And even if I pulled away that wall, there's grass, trees, there's Campbell Hall. But if all that were out of the way, I could see that flat horizon out there somewhere. So it represents that. It also represents the eye level of that one-eyed observer. Right? So it's here for me. So that, right, if I'm looking down at something on my page, I'd want to make sure that this line was higher because my eyes are much higher than the thing I'm looking down at trying to draw. And vice versa, if I was looking up at something, I'd want to bring this down because what I'm looking at's up there, but my eye level's down here. Now, as such, this is another thing with linear perspective. Below this line, as objects get lower, they become closer to the observer. The lower they get on the page, below this line. Those are things that are below my eye level. And it makes sense that as they get lower on the page, they would be closer to me. Because even now, if I look at stuff that's below my eye level out here in front of me, if I look at the tiles on the floor, the tile that is closest to me is down here. The tile that's further away from me is up here like this. I've got a difference of that much right there, right? Where this one's higher than this one. I can recreate that on the page by the lower things get, the closer they are to me, the viewer. If they're above the horizon line, the higher they are, the closer they are to the viewer. That makes sense as well. If I've got this bank of lights that's right here, the closest one to me is up here. The one that's furthest away is out there. This hand is higher than this hand. So as things get higher above the horizon, that makes them closer to the viewer. Then, another rule is that as things get closer to the viewer, they become bigger. Right? So that if I put something down low at this size, as it moves up, it should become smaller and smaller. Again, because things appear larger once they're closer to us. For instance, I know that cabinet that is way over there from me is about the same height as this cabinet here. But this one to me looks about yay big, and that cabinet about there is about this big, right? A very, very big difference, because that one's further away from me. Then we put that horizon line down, and again, we're working with 1 point perspective right now. So somewhere on this horizon line, there should be a point. It is referred to as the vanishing point. And in 1 point perspective, it's so called because there's only one. It also represents two things. It represents the middle of that one-eyed observer's eye. In your case, it would literally represent the space between your eyes, right here. And it is the point on the horizon to which anything that is moving away from me in space, if it could continue out forever, would eventually join and merge at that one point. All right, so in order to see things in 1 point perspective, I kind of have to like square my shoulders off with a wall. If I turn like into the corner, I'm seeing the world in 2 point perspective, which is something we'll talk about in 2 weeks from now. So I have to kind of square off like this. When I do, let's say I look at the lines on the ceiling that are going away from me in space. Not the ones that are parallel to my shoulders that go out like this, but the ones that are moving away from me. For all of you, if you're looking at, say, this wall, it would be like the lights that are going outward this direction. Or if you're looking at this wall here, it would be the lines of the tiles that are going toward that wall for you. And if you were looking at those, and if you can imagine, if those lines continued on past the wall that you're looking at, they would all meet at 1 point. For me, that point's about kind of here. And it lines up nicely with the middle of my eyes and my eye level. Think of it kind of like if you've ever stood on a set of train tracks or seen a photograph of train tracks that just go off into infinity. Right? It gives the sense, if I keep doing this, right, of a flat surface that I could stand on that's moving away from me in space. And these just like I know that bank of lights and lights are running perfectly parallel next to one another. But in my view, they are much closer together out there than they are up here, where they feel like they're nice and wide apart, and then they become closer together as they get further away from me. That's what's happening here. These are parallel lines that converge at a point, making them, instead of appearing parallel, appear to taper inward. Now, there's one more word I want to talk about before we dive in. Well, there's a couple more words, but one we'll talk about. No, before you even talk about foreshortening, let me talk about another thing. So, what we're going to do then, pretty much in any drawing where you're going to be trying to give a perception of reality of three-dimensional space on two-dimensional surface, what we're going to be doing is taking any surface, let me say this is my piece of paper, and dividing it into what we call positive space and negative space. Positive space and negative space. When I have my sheet of paper or my canvas or whatever support that I'm going to make some sort of a drawing or painting onto, I want to make an image on it. All that space that is contained within the outside borders of that support, we just refer to as space. Right? It's open, it's undefined at this point. But as soon as I put something on the page, whatever it might be. Now there's a something there, and that something becomes positive space. It's sort of the subject of my drawing or painting or what have you. And then everything else becomes the negative space, right? If I put, let's say, another object on here, that becomes positive space as well, right? But all this space around and between the positive shapes is negative space. And all these shapes that we're going to be drawing, we refer to as planes. I'm sorry? That's all of that extra space that's around and between positive space. So planes. A plane is any two-dimensional shape. The biggest one you have, once there's a sheet of paper in front of you, is the sheet of paper itself, and we call that the picture plane. And pretty much every kind of art making, drawing, painting, what have you, that is meant to give us the illusion of three-dimensional space is just taking that picture plane and breaking it up into smaller planes that, when they're put into conversation and relationship with one another, give us that illusion of three-dimensional space. So, for instance, since some of you may not be able to see that low, I'll move on to another sheet. Right. That is just a two-dimensional shape. There's no sense of anything three-dimensional happening yet. But if I put that in conversation with and in relationship to another plane, and then another plane up here, I'm starting to create an illusion that this is not just a flat two-dimensional surface, but that I have an object there. And that there's a part of that object that is close to me, and I can see the top of it. That means it must be below my eye level, and I can see one side of it. But because I'm a one-eyed observer with my head locked in place, I can't walk around and take a look at those other two sides, and there's no way I could get up underneath it to see the bottom. But the illusion is still there. That feels like something solid that's in front of me, and again, below my eye level because I can see the top of it. By the way, that is referred to as foreshortening. Let me get more space. Ugh, I still almost don't have enough space. Foreshortening. I'll explain what that means in a sec. I see some people writing it down. All right. So foreshortening. So if a plane like this square, is made in such a way that it is parallel to the top and bottom and sides of my picture plane, that is unforeshortened. It's a square, it's a rectangle, it's a circle, what have you. Foreshortening is taking that plane and squishing it, if you will, in such a way as to make it look like it's starting to turn away from you. So to take that rectangular square and do something like this to it. Right? Gives the appearance now that it's starting to turn, and this side is closer to me, that side is further away. It's squishing inward, and the top and bottom are starting to angle. Or if I took that same rectangle, or same square, and started to turn it this way away from me, it would get sort of trapezoidal like so. Where now this is the part that's closest to me, which was the bottom here. Right? The top has begun to move away from me, and these two lines are then angling and tapering inward. That's what we call foreshortening. Now, I know this is a lot of technical stuff, but it helps to have those understandings in your mind already before you even start to draw. But now let's do that. If I want to make a drawing in 1-point perspective, first I need my horizon. Boom. Then I need my vanishing point. Simple enough. All right. So now I'm going to imagine that I have a small box in front of me, and that it's below my eye level and a little over to my left. Now this is going to be imperfect because you're all sitting in slightly different positions. But if something is below my eye level and slightly over to my left, I'm trying to put it over to your left, in 1-point perspective, the plane of that object that is closest to me will be an unforeshortened rectangle or square. That's where you'll begin. And then this side and the tops will go back toward that vanishing point. But again, you're a one-eyed observer locked, well, with your head locked in place, so you can only see the top and this one side. You can't come around here and see these sides, you can't see the bottom. So let's see if I follow the rules, if that's what it's going to give me. So down here, it's below my eye level and over to the left. I'm going to give myself an unforeshortened rectangle, where the top and bottom and sides are parallel to the top and bottom and sides of my picture plane. In other words, every line is either vertical or horizontal. Right? This is why we have to be in exactly the right position to see the world in 1-point perspective. I have to be squared off of my shoulders facing this wall, and I need everything in here to be at right angles or parallel to each other. So if I were trying to draw this room, I would need to go in and move some of your chairs, because some of your chairs are kind of like scooted over in weird positions. All right? So once I have that in place, that plane that is closest to me on that box, I need some lines that then head back toward the vanishing point. The way I suggest you figure that out is by looking at your corners around your box and figuring out which of those corners is toward your vanishing point and which ones are completely away from it. So there's this one on this side that's away from the vanishing point. There are these that are over here on the same side as the vanishing point. So each of those 3 corners needs a line that is lined up from that corner to the vanishing point. I'll show you. So line my ruler up at the vanishing point, line it up at that corner. I give myself that line. I'll do that for the other 2 corners as well. Right? Now that's already giving me a little bit of an illusion of 3-dimensional space. Right? But it doesn't look like that small box that I have in front of me. It looks like a box that then extends off into forever, right? All the way to the horizon. Well, it doesn't actually do that. At some point, this plane that makes up the side and this plane that makes up the top stop. They don't keep going off into forever. Well, a rule that you can always keep in mind with 1-point perspective is any line that you draw when you're working with cube shapes. It's a little different when we get to shapes that are situated around something that's round, but we'll talk about those on Thursday. If it's a cube, every line I put down should either be vertical, horizontal, or it should be going toward this vanishing point. So if I want to cap off this plane here, I'll do so with a vertical line that gives me the width of that object, and a horizontal line that caps off the top of that object. I don't have an eraser with me, but I would then erase these. These are imaginary lines. They helped me, but I don't need them anymore. And now I have exactly what I was just thinking I would have. There's an unforeshortened plane that's close to me, the viewer. There's one side that I can see that's moving away from me in space. I can see the top. But again, because I'm locked in place and I can't move, I can't go around and look at the other 2 sides, and I can't get up underneath and look at the bottom. All right, so now, let's imagine I have a box that's at my eye level. Right? So if it's at my eye level, but not right in front of my eyes, maybe it's over to my right a little bit, I'm locked in place, so I'm not going to be able to see the top of it because the top of it's above my eye level. I can't see underneath it because the bottom of it's below my eye level. So I should really only see that and one side. So let's see if that's what happens. So I have a box that crosses the horizon so that the bottom of it is below the horizon and the top of it is above. If this is my eye level, I shouldn't be able to see the top of the box and I shouldn't be able to see the bottom of it. But I should be able to see one side of it. So again, I'll do the same thing I did over here. I have two corners that are toward that point and two that are away from it. So I'll give these two corners lines that head toward the vanishing point. I'll never ask you to tell me this information, but these lines are called orthogonals. You know, it was the Renaissance. They had to have fancy names for everything. All right, so that's giving me that one side I was talking about, but again, it's going off into forever. So I need to cap it off. And then I would erase out these lines, and there I have exactly what I thought I would have. I've got the plane that's closest to me I can see, and one side I can't see the top, I can't see the bottom. Last thing, I'm going to imagine now that somehow I've got a box that's floating above my head. I don't know. Aliens. So there's a box that's like floating up here in the sky and up to the left. So if I follow the rules, I should be able to see the bottom of the object. So let's see. I put an object above my eye level. And again, start with that unforeshortened plane that is closest to me. Right? So that means it's above my eye level. The bottom of it is above my eye level. The top of it is above my eye level. Then I should be able to see the bottom of this object because it's floating above my head. All right, well, I've got three corners again that are toward my vanishing point and one that's away from it. These three all need a line going to the vanishing point. I would cap off that bottom with a horizontal line, cap off the side with a vertical line, erase these lines that I don't need, and there I have my magically floating box. One more rule I'll mention, and then I'm going to have you guys get out here and get started. Another thing that happens with the horizon line, as things get further away from the horizon line, they become less and less foreshortened. So something that's up here will be really skinny, and then as it moves downward, it becomes more and more unforeshortened. And the same way up here, right, it starts to open up and open up more as it goes. And then the same thing happens vertically when you're talking about things moving away from the vanishing point. If it's something that's close to the vanishing point, it's going to be really skinny, and then it's going to open up as it moves away from that vanishing point. Just for instance, this chair that's right in front of me. I can only see a little sliver of a side of it because it's really close to where my eyes are. Out here where this is, I can see much more of the side of it because it's starting to open up and become less foreshortened. And with these tiles on the floor, the one that's furthest away from me is this little tiny skinny sliver. I look down here and I've got essentially a square in front of me. All right? So, what I want you to do then is go on out there to your spot. I'm going to get this turned off and then come out there and talk to you about how to get your horizon and vanishing points in place.